You wake up and the alarm clock is buzzing on your nightstand. Not a phone, not a digital assistant, a physical clock with glowing red numbers, and you slam the button with your palm to make it stop. The house smells like coffee percolating on the counter, and the morning paper just hit the front porch with a thud. You have no idea what happened in the world overnight, because there is no way to know until you unfold that paper or turn on the television. This is 1978, and this is your life. This was a year that sat right in the middle of one of the most complicated decades in American history. The optimism of the early 70s had faded. Watergate was still fresh in the national memory. Jimmy Carter was in the White House promising honesty and decency after years of scandal. Inflation was climbing and the economy felt shaky, but Americans were still building lives, raising families, and finding joy in a world that moved at a pace that seems almost impossible to imagine now. Disco was at its absolute peak. Star Wars had just changed movies forever. The first test tube baby was born. The Yankees won the World Series again, and across America, people were living a daily life so different from today that it almost feels like another country. Let us walk through what an ordinary day actually looked like. Some of this might trigger memories buried deep. Some of it might explain why people who live through it talk about it the way they do. Let's step into 1978. Your home in 1978 looked like something from another world compared to today. The kitchen had appliances in harvest gold or avocado green. There were linoleum floors with busy patterns. Wallpaper with enormous flowers or geometric designs covered at least one wall, maybe every wall. The countertops were Formica, and the cabinets had that heavy, dark wood look. The living room had shag carpet so thick you could lose a quarter in it. A large console television sat against one wall like a piece of furniture, because it was a piece of furniture. It weighed as much as a small refrigerator, and it received maybe 7 or 8 channels if the antenna was adjusted just right. There was no remote control in most homes. Someone had to get up and walk to the set to change the channel, and that someone was usually the youngest person in the room. Wood paneling covered the walls in the den or the basement. A hi-fi stereo system with large speakers sat in the corner, and the record collection was displayed on a shelf nearby. Vinyl records were not vintage collectibles. They were how you listened to music. Period. The telephone was mounted on the kitchen wall with a cord that stretched across the room. There was one phone number for the entire household. When it rang, anyone might answer. There was no caller ID, no voicemail, no way to screen calls. You picked up the phone and said hello and hoped it was for you. If you had teenagers in the house, they were fighting over that phone line every evening. Long-distance calls cost real money, and parents watched the phone bill like a hawk. Calling someone in another state was something you thought about before doing it. Getting dressed in 1978 meant embracing a look that was bold by any standard. Shirts had wide collars that spread almost to the shoulders. Polyester was everywhere. Bell-bottom pants had not yet gone away, though straight-leg jeans were coming in. Earth tones dominated the everyday wardrobe: brown, tan, rust, and mustard yellow. But going out at night was a different story entirely. Disco fashion was at its absolute zenith. Satin shirts were unbuttoned to reveal gold chains. Platform shoes added 3 inches of height. Women wore wrap dresses, halter tops, and high-waisted pants that flared dramatically. The goal was to look good under the lights of the dance floor, and people committed fully. Your car in 1978 was enormous by modern standards. It was a full-size American sedan with a V8 engine, bench seats in the front, and no seatbelts that anyone actually used. The dashboard was a flat expanse of metal and hard plastic. Air conditioning existed but was considered a luxury option. Many people still rolled down the windows. Gas prices were a constant topic of conversation. The memory of the 1973 oil crisis lingered, and prices were climbing again. Fuel economy was terrible. Getting 12 miles to the gallon was normal, and nobody had heard the phrase hybrid vehicle. Japanese imports from Toyota and Datsun were appearing on American roads in growing numbers, smaller and more efficient. American automakers dismissed them, and that would turn out to be a mistake. Driving meant navigating with paper maps folded and stuffed in the glove compartment. If you got lost, you pulled into a gas station and asked for directions from a real person. There was no GPS, no mapping app, no voice telling you to turn left in 500 feet. You either knew where you were going or you figured it out. Before we continue with the culture and entertainment that made 1978 unforgettable, if you are enjoying this trip back to how Americans really lived and want to explore more decades and places, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about how life in America has changed in ways people have already forgotten. Going to work in 1978 meant something different than it does now. Offices were filled with typewriters, carbon paper, and filing cabinets stuffed with manila folders. There were no computers on desks. Memos were typed, copied, and physically distributed. If you made a mistake while typing, you used correction fluid and waited for it to dry. The copy machine was a major piece of office technology, and there was usually a line to use it. Smoking was allowed everywhere. In the office, in restaurants, on airplanes, in hospitals. Ashtrays sat on desks and conference room tables. The idea that smoking would be banned from public spaces would have seemed absurd. Women were entering the workforce in growing numbers, but the workplace was not built for them. Sexual harassment had no legal definition. The wage gap was enormous and openly accepted. Women in professional settings faced barriers that were both institutional and cultural. The changes were beginning, but slowly. After work, entertainment options were limited compared to today, but people did not feel limited. They felt like they had plenty to do. Going to the movies was a major event. In 1978, the films coming out of Hollywood were remarkable. Grease brought John Travolta back to the screen after Saturday Night Fever. Superman made audiences believe a man could fly. Animal House launched a new era of comedy. Every Which Way But Loose somehow made an orangutan a movie star. National Lampoon's material was pushing boundaries. Television in the evening meant gathering around that one set. Dallas premiered in 1978. Laverne and Shirley was the most watched show in the country. Happy Days was still huge. Mork and Mindy introduced Robin Williams to America. Three's Company pushed the boundaries of what sitcoms could joke about. There were only 3 major networks, so when a show was popular, nearly everyone in the country was watching it. The next day at work or school, everyone had seen the same thing. Music in 1978 was defined by disco, but it was not the only sound. The Bee Gees dominated the charts. Saturday Night Fever's soundtrack was everywhere, and disco culture was at its peak. Studio 54 in New York was the most famous nightclub in the world, a place of excess and celebrity. Across America, local discos opened in cities and suburbs. People dressed up and danced under mirror balls on light-up floors. But not everyone loved disco. A backlash was building. Rock fans resented its dominance. Country music was holding strong. The Rolling Stones released some of their grittiest material. Billy Joel put out an album that proved piano rock belonged on the radio. Bruce Springsteen was building a devoted following. The airwaves were diverse, even if disco got all the attention. Shopping in 1978 meant going to the mall, and malls were becoming the center of American social life. The enclosed shopping mall was in its golden age. Department stores like Sears, JCPenney, and Montgomery Ward anchored either end. Between them were specialty shops, record stores, and food courts. Teenagers gathered at malls not to buy things, but to see each other. It was the social network before social networks existed. Grocery shopping happened once a week at the local supermarket. There were no organic labels, no gluten-free sections, no alternative milks. Processed foods were booming. TV dinners, canned vegetables, and instant everything filled the shelves. Hamburger Helper was a weeknight staple. Families ate dinner together at the kitchen table most nights, and eating out was reserved for special occasions. Fast food was expanding rapidly. McDonald's was everywhere. Burger King and Wendy's were growing. Pizza Hut was becoming a sit-down family restaurant. These chains were affordable, consistent, and becoming deeply embedded in American culture. For kids in 1978, life was lived outside. There were no video games yet beyond the most basic Atari consoles, just beginning to appear in some homes. Kids rode bikes without helmets, drank from garden hoses, and came home when the streetlights turned on. Parents had a general idea of where their children were, but tracking them was impossible. Freedom was the default setting of childhood. Saturday mornings meant cartoons. Kids would pour cereal into bowls and sit inches from the television screen watching Scooby-Doo, the Flintstones, and Looney Tunes. These were appointment viewing because if you missed them, there was no other way to see them. The economy in 1978 was causing real anxiety. Inflation was rising sharply. The cost of groceries, gas, and housing kept climbing. Interest rates were heading upward. The American middle class, which had enjoyed decades of growth and stability, was starting to feel the squeeze. A single income could still support a family in many parts of the country, but it was getting harder. The sense that each generation would automatically do better than the last was beginning to crack. What defined 1978 was that America was caught between eras. The rebellious energy of the 60s and early 70s was fading. The conservative shift of the 80s had not yet arrived. The country was in a kind of limbo, uncertain about its direction but still confident in its resilience. People were dancing to disco, watching blockbuster movies, raising families in suburban houses with shag carpet, and driving massive cars to shopping malls. For those who lived through it, 1978 was a year of small pleasures and big hair. It was a time of rotary phones and record players, of knowing your neighbors and not locking your doors. The world moved slower, felt smaller, and in many ways felt more connected even without a single device linking everyone together. For those with memories of that unforgettable year, there is always more history to explore.